What if the most famous ancient aliens of the internet were never aliens at all? From YouTube videos to late-night conspiracy forums, you keep seeing the same word: Anunnaki, alien overlords, gold miners from a hidden planet, the secret rulers of Earth. But here's the twist. When you go back to the oldest clay tablets in history, the story they tell is very different from what you've been sold. In this episode, you're not going to hear what modern people imagine about the Anunnaki. You're going to hear what the ancient Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians actually wrote, and how those writings quietly shaped the Bible, the Flood story, and even the way you think about God today. By the end, you'll be able to say something very few people online can honestly claim. I know what the Anunnaki really are, and what was added thousands of years later. Welcome to Echoes of Time. Today, Anunnaki lives in memes, TikTok edits, and wild PowerPoint theories. But the word itself is older than the Bible, older than the Greek myths, older than almost everything you've ever heard of. In the ancient language of Sumer, it appears as Anunna, later in Akkadian as Anunnaki. Roughly, it means the princely offspring, the royal seed, the noble descendants of heaven and earth. To the people who first carved this word into wet clay, the Anunnaki were not lizard overlords from space. They were something much more familiar, and in a way much more unsettling. They were the great gods, the High Council, the ones who decided what would live and what would be erased. For the Sumerians, the universe was ruled by a few major powers: An, the Sky Father Kai, the Earth Mother; Enlil, Lord of the wind and of the air, who separates heaven from earth; Enki, the clever god of water and wisdom; Ninhursag, Nana, Utu, Inanna, and others. Different cities worshipped different patrons, but when texts speak of the Anunna of heaven and earth, they are talking about this upper tier of gods who meet in council and decide destinies. In some hymns, they sit in assembly and fix the fates of mankind. In other stories, they descend into the underworld as judges of the dead. The same word, two very different roles. Already you can feel the first crack in the modern myth. The Anunnaki were a divine committee, not a space mining crew. But the story becomes stranger when another group walks onto the stage. A group that will later be turned into the core of the most explosive Anunnaki narrative of all. They're called the Igigi. And in one of the oldest legends we have, the Igigi start a heavenly strike that ends with the creation of us. Imagine this for a second. The gods are tired. Not the high gods, not Enlil, Enki, and the great Anunnaki in their council chamber, but the younger, lower-ranking gods, the Igigi. For years they have been digging canals, raising walls, doing all the hard work of maintaining creation. They are exhausted, furious. And one night, in a story that reads almost like a workers' revolt, they snap. This is the opening of the Atrahasis epic, written around 3,800 years ago. The text says, the Igigi gods carried the work basket, labored under the load was too great, the trouble too much. So they march by night to the house of Enlil, surround it, and throw their tools into the fire. They set heaven itself on fire with rebellion. This is not a human uprising. It's a divine strike faced with mutiny. The great Anunnaki Council panics. Killing all the rebels would solve nothing. Someone will still have to do the work. So another idea appears. An idea you already know in a very different form. Let us create a creature who will bear the yoke, who will carry the basket of the gods. To end the heavenly strike, the Anunnaki decide to create humans. In the Atrahasis story, the wise god Enki and the mother goddess Nintu mix the flesh and blood of a sacrificed god with clay. From this mixture, they shape the first humans. We are literally made from divine blood and earthly mud, designed to take over the labor that broke the Igigi. This is not a flattering origin myth. You are not the crown of creation here. You are hired help. You were built to dig, to irrigate, to bring food and offerings to the temples, so that the Anunnaki and Igigi could live in comfort. Now pause for a moment. If you grew up hearing that humans are the beloved central project of God, how does it feel to step into a world where humans are just a workaround? This older and far more cynical version of our origin will echo later in other religions, but in the Atrahasis epic, something else happens first. The new creation works too well. Humans multiply, cities grow, noise rises, and the Anunnaki who wanted peace find that their new servants are too loud. So they vote again. This time, the solution is not creation, it's destruction. Thousands of years before you ever heard the name Noah, someone in Mesopotamia was already writing about a global flood sent to wipe out mankind. In the Atrahasis epic, the human population grows so much that their noise keeps Enlil awake. The great god is enraged. He wants silence. So the Council of Anunnaki decides on a sequence of plagues and famines to reduce humanity. When that's not enough, they agree on a final solution: a devastating flood that will drown almost everyone. Sound familiar? In this story, one man is forewarned: Atrahasis, the very wise. The god Enki, who has always been closer to humans, whispers the secret to him through the wall of his house. He tells Atrahasis to tear down his home and build a gigantic boat to save his family and the seed of all living creatures. If you're hearing the book of Genesis in your head right now, that's not an accident. Later, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, this flood story is retold through another survivor, Utnapishtim. He describes black clouds, thunder, and Anunnaki torch-bearers who light up the sky as the storm begins. He watches as the waters rage for days, wiping out the cities of men. And then, in one of the most human moments in any ancient myth, the gods themselves are terrified by what they have done. The goddess Ishtar cries out that she gave birth to mankind only to watch them all drowned. The Anunnaki gather like flies around the sacrifice that Utnapishtim offers when the flood is over. The decision is made. Never again like this. From now on, humans will be controlled by other means: shorter lifespans, infertility, natural limits, but not total erasure. If this structure sounds familiar, it should. The biblical Noah story, written much later in Hebrew, follows the same skeleton. A corrupt or noisy humanity, a chosen survivor, a divinely instructed boat, a world-destroying flood, a sacrifice, and a promise not to repeat such a catastrophe. Most scholars agree. The Israelite writers of Genesis were living in a world where the Mesopotamian flood myth was already ancient. They reshaped it to fit a single moral god. But behind that new theology, you can still see the shadow of the Anunnaki Council. Here's the unsettling part. In the older version, humanity is not judged for sin or for moral evil. We're simply inconvenient. Too many, too loud. The Anunnaki don't act like perfect gods. They act like rulers who make bad decisions, regret them, and try again. Which raises a question that will haunt the rest of this story. If your earliest gods are this flawed, what does that do to the later stories built on their bones? The idea of a divine council, a group of elder gods who decide the fate of the world, is not unique to Mesopotamia. But the details of the Anunnaki stories help you see just how far their influence may have reached. In ancient Egypt, a group called the Ennead, a council of 9 gods, rules the universe from Heliopolis. Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys form a divine family tree, not so different in tone from An, Enlil, Enki, and their offspring. In Greece, the Titans are overthrown by the Olympian gods in a cosmic revolution. In some Hurrian and Hittite myths, we read about the old gods, who were pushed into the underworld by a younger generation. Mesopotamian texts sometimes use the word Anunnaki in almost the same way, as the earlier generation of gods, associated with the depths below, humans being made from clay, from earth shaped by divine hands, appears again and again. In Mesopotamia, clay mixed with the blood of a god. In the Hebrew Bible, Adam formed from dust, animated by the breath of God. In Greek myth, Prometheus molds humans from earth and water. In Chinese myth, the goddess Nuwa shapes people from yellow river mud. The pattern is everywhere. Then there's the flood. From the story of Manu in India, to Deucalion and Pera in Greece, to indigenous legends across the Americas, we keep hearing about a time when everything was drowned and a small group survived. Does this prove a single original source? Or does it prove that humans in many places experienced catastrophic floods and tried to make sense of them? Mainstream scholarship leans toward a mix of cultural transmission and shared human experience. Fact, Mesopotamia was an early center of literacy and empire. Its stories spread along trade routes, shaping neighbors and later empires in subtle and not so subtle ways. But even where there is no direct contact, people living next to violent rivers and seas will tell flood stories. People who farm the earth will describe humans as clay. People who watch the sky will imagine gods in the stars. The Anunnaki are one version of this deep human pattern, a pattern that later faiths absorb, rewrite, and sometimes try to erase. And yet, one of the most radical rewrites was still to come. It wouldn't happen in Babylon or in a temple. It would happen in the 20th century, in the mind of a man reading these myths and deciding they must mean something else entirely. If you search Anunnaki today, the first thing you see is not a clay tablet. It's a CGI reptile in a suit. That jump from ancient gods to space reptiles has a date and a name. In 1976, writer Zecharia Sitchin published a book called The 12th Planet. He proposed a bold idea: the Anunnaki were not gods in the mythological sense at all, but flesh and blood extraterrestrials from a hidden planet called Nibiru. According to Sitchin's reading, Nibiru is a massive planet on a 3,600-year orbit around the Sun. Its atmosphere was failing, and the Anunnaki needed gold to repair it. They came to Earth around 450,000 years ago, established bases in Mesopotamia and elsewhere, and began mining. When their own workers rebelled, they genetically engineered Homo sapiens by mixing their DNA with that of primitive hominids, creating us as a slave species to work the mines. If that sounds like science fiction, that's because, in a very real sense, it is. Sitchin claimed he got this all from reading the Sumerian tablets, but when professional Assyriologists checked, they found a problem. The tablets don't actually say what Sitchin says they say. The word Anunnaki in genuine texts means the princely seed, or offspring of Anu, not those who from heaven to earth came. The word Nibiru in Babylonian astronomy usually refers to a point or crossing in the sky, often associated with Jupiter, not a hidden 12th planet with an atmosphere problem. There is no text that describes the Anunnaki arriving in spaceships, mining gold, or editing anyone's genome. Specialists like Michael Heiser and many others have spent years comparing Sitchin's claims to real cuneiform. Their verdict is blunt. His translations are wrong, his astronomy is wrong, his history is wrong. And yet, his story spread like wildfire. Why? Because it offered something incredibly seductive, a way to connect every mystery, pyramids, ziggurats, myths, even the Bible, into one big secret narrative. If you feel that official history is too dry, too human, the idea that gods were just aliens feels like a revelation. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Sitchin's theory is not accepted by any major university or serious specialist. It relies on mistranslations and cherry-picked details. It often smuggles in a subtle insult that ancient cultures could not have built impressive monuments or developed complex math without outside help. That last point is important. When we say, aliens must have built this, we are often saying, ancient humans couldn't possibly have done it. And yet they did. They developed writing, astronomy, law codes, and monumental architecture over centuries, not overnight. So where does that leave you, the viewer? You don't have to abandon curiosity or the sense that there are mysteries in history. You don't have to stop enjoying ancient aliens as a genre, but if you want to know the Anunnaki as they really appear in the record, you have to separate what the tablets say from what later authors wished they said. The real story might be less cinematic, yet in some ways, it's far more revealing. Because the Anunnaki tell you something even stranger than gods were aliens. They tell you how humans learned to think about power, justice, and the divine. And they do it through images. You've probably seen the pictures. A winged, bearded figure with muscles of stone, one hand holding a little bag, the other reaching out with something that looks like a pine cone, standing before a strange, stylized tree. This image has become a favorite of conspiracy channels. The little bag is called the Sumerian handbag. The figure is treated as an Anunnaki alien engineer holding advanced tech. But what do Assyriologists see when they look at the same relief? They see a very specific set of ritual tools. The bag is a bucket, called bandudu in Akkadian, a container for holy water or blessed liquid. The pine cone is a mullalu, a purifying implement, often a date palm male flower used to sprinkle that water. The winged figure is not Enlil or Anu, but an Apkallu, a sage or protective spirit in Assyrian palaces. These figures stand frozen in stone, facing a stylized sacred tree. They dip the cone into the bucket and raise it towards the tree, as if anointing or fertilizing it. It's a scene of blessing and purification, not of aliens tending DNA. Another powerful symbol is the winged sun disk. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, a disk with outstretched wings appears above kings and temples. For Assyrians, this often represents the god Ashur, or the protective presence of a high deity. For Egyptians, it stands for Ra or Horus, the sun as a life-giving royal force. Today, people see rockets and UFOs where ancient viewers saw the majesty of the sun and the reach of divine protection. Then there is the strange rod and ring motif in the famous stele of Hammurabi. The sun god Shamash sits on a throne, handing the king a ring and a staff. Conspiracy theories call them codes or devices, but the most grounded reading is simpler and, again, more human. They are measuring tools. A straight rod and a coiled line used by surveyors and builders. By handing them to Hammurabi, the god is symbolically giving him the right to measure justice, to set fair boundaries, to establish law. Many modern viewers miss this because we no longer live in a world where a king literally goes to the fields to measure out land, but in the ancient world, justice and measurement were deeply linked. The Anunnaki and their associated gods are constantly shown as givers of order, cosmic and social. Finally, there is the star. In cuneiform, a small 8-pointed star sign is used as the Dingia sign, a determinative that marks divine names. The 8-pointed star itself becomes the symbol of the goddess Inanna/Ishtar, often tied to the planet Venus. On kuduru stones and boundary markers, you see 3 main symbols together. A sun disk for Shamash, a crescent for the moon, Godsin, an 8-pointed star for Ishtar. Together, they represent the heavenly triad overseeing oaths and boundaries, in other words, bucket and cone, purification, winged disc, divine protection and kingship. Rod and ring, law, measure, authority. 8-pointed star, the bright planet, the goddess of love and war. None of these need a spaceship to make sense. They are the visual language of a society obsessed with order, blessing, and the right to rule. And at the center of this symbolic universe sit the Anunnaki, not as engineers from Orion, but as the invisible powers whose decisions flow through these images into everyday life. So how do we get from all this to the world of monotheism, where instead of a council of Anunnaki you have one god and perhaps a few angels? When the people who would become the ancient Israelites were exiled to Babylon, they entered a world where the flood of Atrahasis and the councils of the Anunnaki were already ancient stories. They heard about a man who survived a global deluge in a great boat. They saw temples built as ziggurats, mountains of brick reaching into the sky. They encountered a legal tradition older than their own law codes. The writers of the Hebrew Bible did not simply copy these stories. They argued with them. They took the flood and gave it a new reason. Not noise, but violence and corruption. They took the many gods and fused authority into a single, all-powerful YHWH. In that process, shadows of the Anunnaki Council remained. The idea of a divine assembly, where God stands in the congregation of the mighty, appears in Psalm 82. The vision of a group of heavenly beings debating human fate echoes older Mesopotamian scenes. Then there is the mysterious word Nephilim in Genesis 6. Giants, fallen ones, beings linked to sons of God taking daughters of men. Later Jewish texts like the Book of Enoch turn this into a full story of fallen angels who descend, mate with humans, and teach forbidden arts. Modern Anunnaki believers often merge these. The Nephilim were the Anunnaki, the fallen angels were the alien gods. But this is a modern fusion, not an ancient one. The biblical authors never use the word Anunnaki. Their world knows of Mesopotamian gods but rejects them. Still, the pattern remains. A heaven where decisions are made about humanity, a hybrid boundary between divine and human, a catastrophic flood, and a reset. In Islam, these echoes arrive filtered through Judaism and Christianity. The Quran speaks of a single God, not councils of Anunnaki. Yet it still tells of Adam made from clay, of a flood, of angels and unseen beings. The names have changed. The theology is radically different. But the deep human concerns? Why are we here? Who rules over us? Why do disasters happen? Can we be wiped out? Are the same concerns that once animated the stories of the Anunnaki. You could say that later monotheisms replaced the caste, but kept the questions, and the Anunnaki became part of the prehistory of God, a layer of narrative sediment buried under newer revelations. So after all this, what are you left with? If the Anunnaki were not reptilian billionaires from Nibiru, if there is no 12th planet about to swing through the inner solar system, if no ancient tablet secretly describes gene editing in a lab, does the story still matter? More than ever. Because once you peel away the fake translations and sci-fi packaging, the Anunnaki show you something raw and honest about the human mind. They show you the moment when we first tried to explain why we exist as helpers, as workers, as noisemakers. Why we suffer because the powers above us make decisions we don't control. Why disasters happen because the High Council decided to wipe the board clean and start again. Why rulers claim authority? Because they say it was handed to them by gods with rods and rings, stars and suns. They also show you how powerful stories travel. A legend about a divine strike and a flood, told in Sumerian hundreds of years before Abraham, echoes into Hebrew, Greek, Arabic, until it shapes what billions of people believe about God and justice. Then, thousands of years later, a modern writer stitches pieces of those stories into a new myth about alien engineers, and that myth shapes what millions of people think history really is. Same names, different uses. So here is the key distinction to carry with you. Anunnaki, as understood by ancient Mesopotamians, high gods, members of a divine council, sometimes judges of the dead, sometimes creators of humanity, always tied to temples, rituals, and the order of their world. Anunnaki, as presented by modern ancient alien theory, spacefaring miners from Nibiru, genetic engineers, secret overlords, using Earth as a project. Those are two different beings wearing the same mask. You don't have to choose blind belief in either version. You can respect the ingenuity of the ancients without turning them into helpless puppets of ETS. You can enjoy science fiction without confusing it with archaeology. And you can read sacred texts with a deeper awareness of the older stories humming underneath them. In that sense, the Anunnaki are still doing what they always did. They force you to ask who holds power over your life, and how much of that power is real, and how much is a story someone told you. In this episode, we traced the Anunnaki from their birth in clay tablets to their reinvention as internet aliens. But one part of their story deserves its own deep dive. The Igigi revolt, that strange heavenly strike that leads to the creation of mankind, and the question of whether Earth was always meant to be a home or a work site. In our next episode, we travel to the world's first great temples and towering ziggurats to ask a dangerous question. Were places like Göbekli Tepe and the earliest sacred sites on Earth built for the gods, or built against them? Stay with us, because the oldest stones on this planet may be whispering a story even older than the Anunnaki themselves.